And welcome to another post-game edition of Spits and Suds. Hello, everybody. I'm Gavin Spittle of 105.3 The Fan. The Stars suffered their second loss at the American Airlines Center, and it wasn't a good one, by the score of 4-1. Thank you so much for supporting Spits and Suds, even with the wins or the losses. You guys are always there, and we appreciate it. Also want to say happy holidays and truly appreciate the support that you've had for us this year. Speaking of support, this guy is awesome. Love having him on the program. Live from the American Airlines Center, it's the greatness of Robert Tiffin. The website that you need to check out on a daily basis is starsthoughts.com. He also writes for D Magazine, some terrific articles there. At Robert Tiffin on Twitter. How are you, my friend?
Yeah, doing pretty well, Gavin. It's been fun. Stars had 3 days off, but a lot of riding to do still. And the hope that this was going to be a pretty fun game to see with the Stars. Having won a big game recently against Calgary, and then Lian Bichsel coming up for his debut, and it, I guess, didn't quite turn out that way.
Yeah, I guess the first question is it's fascinating because even Pete DeBoer had to answer this question after the game, as far as you have a team that has been basically playing every other night, a lot of times 3 games in 4 days, and they finally get rest, and just came out and it just wasn't hitting tonight. It was just such a slow start. And I mean, I don't want to, but I mean, basically I thought Nashville pretty much dominated from start to finish. Dominated times, Stars were equal to them, but I never saw the Stars be like, oh wow, here they come, maybe for a minute or two after the Bichsel goal. But it was just really fascinating how they finally get rest and then come out like this. And even DeBoer mentioned afterwards to you and to the other members that, it's kind of interesting because if 1 or 2 players come out like this, okay, but the whole team, he mentioned, came out like this.
Yeah, and he said something really interesting in there because the obvious question that we all would have asked given the chance is basically, and we asked it to Jamie Benn too. Look, there was the loss to Anaheim a few weeks ago. And, DeBoer said after that, every team in the league is going to have a game like this. You lose a clunker to a team you should beat. It happens. Life happens. You move on. Then they had the loss to Chicago in that week after the bad, blown lead against Carolina. But the loss to Chicago, I think even DeBoer said afterwards, that felt like the low point of the season. And then to have another game just a week or two later after that, like this one, it starts to feel a little bit like you can't really just write it off as a one-off anymore. And DeBoer said tonight, well, like you said, number one, it wasn't just 1 or 2 guys or just the goalie or something. Like even in Chicago, he kind of intimated that DeSmith didn't help them. From the first shot, we were struggling, right? He mentioned DeSmith, kind of alluded to DeSmith, I guess. And in this one, he said, well, it's the type of thing where, initially you deal with it one way, but next time, if we start to see this just lack of effort again, we'll have to try to address it a different way next time. And there's well, now you get to talk about what would that different way be. Would it be, you bench someone? Obviously you can always just pull the goalie just to get the team going, but the way he was talking about it, it sounded like something even more serious than just pulling a goalie. It sounded more, benching a player is the first thing I thought of when he was talking post game. I don't know what you thought when you heard him say that.
Yeah, I was a little surprised. And he mentioned the best players of the game were the video coaches.
Yeah,
and
that was a good line, wasn't it? That was a pretty good line.
Yeah, absolutely. And they nailed it. Yeah. And so you only have so many moves you can make. It's kind of like the power play. You only could do so many things. And Robert, I don't know when the whole team doesn't, show up like that. I guess my only thing, and this may be too old school, but I appreciate Sam Steele when he went to the net and he's poking and he causes Forsberg to, kind of try to rough him up, and then he punches Forsberg. And just that little thing, you heard the crowd almost like they were sitting on their hands, and just something that little, they just like that, they had something to cheer for. And I felt as like after that, the Stars had a couple good shifts. So I'm kind of looking for that energy person. And the other thing I was telling a friend of mine, we were talking about the game, is I look at this Stars team and I wonder the consistency. Maybe Matt Duchene, but, I don't want to say he's slumping as of late, but since Sagan, he really, hasn't been that, consistent player that he really was earlier. Maybe Ottinger. But other than that, like, there just has to be guys that step up when the team is down. And that's something where that leads me to, like, some of your players that you've talked about on starsthoughts.com as far as possible trade scenarios. So kind of that missing piece where it's a guy that's like, get on my back tonight.
It's funny, the one change he did make in the roster tonight, or in the lineup, I should say, is that the right wings got shuffled in the third period. So I think Stankoven moved up to the top line with Hinson Robertson. Johnston moved down to play next to Jamie Benn and Sam Steele. In fact, I think he was doing that. I don't think he got a point on Bichsel's goal, but he was playing on that line when Steele and Benn and Bichsel went up and Bichsel scored. And then Dodonov moved up to the, I think, Duchene line. It's telling the right wings were the things that got rotated, and Sagan is the right wing that they haven't had, like you mentioned. And Duchene has, I think he's still making good plays. He's still able to carry the puck and beat players and gain the zone really well. But they do seem to be missing that extra play, right? And even tonight, they had a couple plays. Wyatt Johnston in the third period, I thought he came out at the start of the third period, and he was a big part of the push that they did have. And even after the goal, he had, I think, a couple of scoring chances he set up, and one he created almost all by himself on the power play, I think it was. But he set up Jamie Benn for that with that cross crease pass, and give Justus Annunen credit for sealing the post there.
Yeah.
But that's when you really want to see Jamie Benn bury, when you have Johnston actually going and starting to create chances, and you just get the feeling that if they'd gotten one other one early, that maybe they would have had a chance and that push would have lingered longer, because by the time they really, they got the Bichsel goal and they had a couple cracks at it, but then, it's already 4 or 5 minutes left, and then you're pulling the goalie, and then that's all she wrote.
I think this was we probably both can agree this was a tough game for Nils Lundkvist tonight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's tough. Like DeBoer said, he made a point of saying, look, it's the whole lineup. So it's not like this is just, one or two guys or one pair or one line or one goalie or whatever. It really is. Lundkvist needs to be stronger on a stick on that first Preds goal. Absolutely. Yep. It's a rebound, but, high above the net. He's kind of trying to wait. It's a weird spot. A lot of other Stars players, right, they're kind of going behind the net because they're expecting it to turn into a board battle. So they're going to try to, outnumber the attackers and get the puck. And instead, he loses it pretty clean to, I think, Marchessault, who then sets up, was that O'Reilly, I think, coming right down the gut of the ice. Yeah. Ottinger had actually made a couple of similar stops earlier in the game. So like you said, Ottinger probably is one player you can't really say anything bad about in terms of effort lately. He's still been very good, and in this game he really did keep the Stars in it for probably longer than they deserve to be, if we're really honest. He had a couple of really nice saves.
I agree.
Scrambles, but that one, for Lundkvist, that's just not good enough. It's a shame too, because earlier in the game I thought he had a couple really nice plays in the offensive zone, and that's something DeBoer said he really needs to see from him, but neither of them quite resulted in the goals they needed, right? And even when he got the shots through, they either Annunen found them, or they got tipped wide or knocked down or just saved far too easily. And it's disappointing. You can see a path where those plays could have turned into something or a goal, and then you can build on that and it's a good game. But like you said, the Stars never really got that spark going. And then once adversity hit, they crumbled immediately, right? 3 goals in 3 minutes. That's a sign of a team that maybe just isn't quite as resilient as they needed to be tonight.
Right. So I don't like to become like argumentative with Spits and Suds listeners, because you guys make us what we are. However, there are a few of you that commented on Jake Ottinger tonight. And Robert, I understand the point of view that it's like very polarizing, similar to the quarterback or the starting pitcher or the point guard, or there's always going to be players in sports that have a greater notoriety, let's just say, for criticism. Mm-hmm. But let's go through the goals. One goal was an empty net goal. That's obviously not on Jake Ottinger. Go back to the first goal. You're right. Ottinger made some key saves, and Ottinger cannot, I mean, that Ryan O'Reilly, no one picked him up. They
Yeah,
were
well, yeah,
standing
and think
around.
about it. If that's a Stars player coming in on the Preds goalie, you would say that Stars player has to score, right? You'd say,
Yeah,
oh, Jason Robertson has to score that chance,
right.
right? But then when it's the other way, you want to say Jake Ottinger, how could you?
Yeah,
You
exactly.
can't have it both ways. That's a chance. There's a reason teams try never to give up that chance. It's a really
Right.
high quality scoring chance.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's Ryan O'Reilly, Stanley Cup champion,
Yeah.
award winner,
Yep.
just a beast. All right, so that's 2 of the 4 goals.
Mm-hmm.
The other goal was the Preds player coming through basically the crease untouched
Yeah.
and not blocked and being able to wrap around. Ottinger tried but couldn't get that leg out, just missed it. I mean, might he have wanted it back? Okay, but that does not look like an easy, goal. Once again, that's on defense. And then the other goal is
Yeah,
Ryan O'Reilly's second of the night, Robert, which is a high tip. I don't know if many goalies stop
that was a
that
great
unless
tip.
they're
That
coming
was a
across with
great
the
tip.
pad.
That's
Yeah.
exactly what O'Reilly was trying to do with it too. He swings almost kind of with the puck and gets the
Yeah.
stick coming in and behind the puck, right? That's not hitting the front of the puck and having it deflect. He swings his stick and catches up to the puck and bats it down 5-hole in Ottinger when it was high, and Ottinger's ready to make the high save. I mean, it's a beautiful tip.
It was
There's a reason O'Reilly was, on the cup winning team in St. Louis, right? A few years ago. I mean, he's a great player, and even though he's getting up there in years, tonight showed you, I think he even had been missing a few games, and he comes back into the lineup, and boom, first star of the game, scores 3 points, right?
Right.
The Stars needed a performance like that tonight, and they didn't get it.
Well, and I'll have to go back and watch the video, but I believe that first goal that Ryan O'Reilly scored caught the Stars on a line change, and it was Ryan O'Reilly that made the outlet pass and then comes all the way down the ice untouched. So it really is like, I understand Stars fans, you give up 4. I understand, but this game is not on Jake Ottinger.
No.
So, we explain the goals, and a goalie can't stop everything, especially all of those were high danger chances where men were not properly picked up. The tip was just a great goal. You're exactly what you said, Robert. We would expect a Stars player to score. And you know what? If that was Joe Pavelski last year with that high tip, which he's one of the best of all time, we'd be saying that's Joe Pavelski. He's awesome. We wouldn't be saying, no, Sorrow should have stopped that high tip, or whoever, name goalie.
Yeah, and I know it can sound kind of like you're defending the goalie or apologizing for the goalie and saying, "Oh, none of them are his fault" or whatever. Obviously, the goalie's going to say, "There was a way for me to make all of those saves." Right? I guarantee you, if you really talk to Ottinger, he'd say, "Yeah, this was my save selection on that shot or whatever." And in retrospect, I probably could have been a little better positioned or could have been prepared to do this. He can always say that. But 2 of those goals are essentially breakaways, one-on-one with the goalie, completely beating the defense. So just to get to that point is already a huge breakdown by everyone else. It's great when your goalie saves you on those, and Ottinger saved him once or twice in chances like that in this game. But the Novak chance in particular is one where he and Ben go into the wall, I think, with the puck initially, and then Novak had given it up, and then Novak beats Ben off the wall. But I think my guess is Ben lets him go there from the wall because he assumes there's going to be someone back. And Maverick Bourque had been back covering for Heiskanen, who had been covering his man with the puck, pulled up high. So Bourque had been back down low where the defenseman would have been. But then Bourque looks around, sees no one's by me. I need to go help with coverage up in the zone. Bourque leaves. Ben lets this man go, and that space is wide open, and Novak gets this great pass from Marchessault also, by the way, who was also good, right? I mean, that's why they paid all this money for players like Marchessault and O'Reilly, right? These are players who haven't been what Nashville has wanted them to be after going out and getting them in free agency. And, they did what you need them to do, and the Stars players, not so much. In fact, the last thing I'll say about goaltending is if you look at all the goals tonight, probably the worst goal given up by any goalie was Bichsel's goal, which is a wrister from the top of the circle. That's probably the most savable of all of those goals.
Yeah. And that's the other thing, too, when we talk about energy. You look at the Stars and the opportunities. How you have a goalie that just came over from Colorado who's in a backup role. He has played his second now good game for Nashville, but at the same time, where is the pressure on in front of the net that would create those screen situations? It was one of those. To me, they were shooting a lot from the outside tonight, but it is. it is interesting when you lose to Nashville, when you lose to Anaheim, when you lose to Chicago. I don't know if I think parity reigns supreme, and any team can beat any team on a given night. But these teams have this record for a reason, and you have to take advantage of that. So you're not going to win them all, but you certainly need to win a few of them.
It's funny, the Stars, they're okay, right? They're in an okay spot. They aren't having a disastrous season. They're still, at least before this game, they were in front of Colorado. And really, frankly, if you had said at any point in the year the Stars would be in front of Colorado, you'd say then they're probably doing okay, just because of how good Colorado has been historically. And that's really true. As long as the Stars are in front of one of Minnesota, Winnipeg, and Colorado, the rest of the Central probably isn't in position to catch them right now. Although it's a long season, it can change.
Right.
But eventually losing games like this does end up burning you a little bit. It can, if it becomes a trend, right? And until tonight, home ice and Jake Ottinger was a great recipe where even if the Stars started a little slowly, for the most part, they were able to, Ottinger was able to be miraculous and keep them in games. And some of those, 11 home games that Ottinger has won so far, that's exactly what happened. He helped them stay in a game long enough to come back and find a way to win it. And tonight, he helped them for a while, but they just never, the only player to score a goal was the guy in his first NHL game, youngest player on the team now. Wyatt Johnston's no longer the youngest player on the team. Lian Bichsel now is. But that's just not an acceptable effort. And that's why, I'm sure DeBoer had some words for him in the second intermission. And, Jamie Benn after the game, you could tell he was pretty it was just a bad, it's unacceptable. You can't play like this. And that's true. The Preds were the better team tonight, pretty much all over the ice for the vast majority of the game. And, the Stars might have been able to find a way back in, but when you play teams like this, you can't dig holes. You can't keep digging these holes because sometimes you won't be able to dig back out of them.
Utah, by the way, beating up on Colorado. They're going to win that game as we tape this.
Well, there you go. In
Colorado and Utah will only be 3 points behind the Stars for that third position. So pretty amazing story in Utah, especially after they lost Sean Dursey as well as Marino on the blue line, what they're doing. So it's fascinating. And by the way, people have to know this St. Louis team that's coming in under Jim Montgomery, also not too far behind the Stars. So these are important games. Do I think the Stars are better than St. Louis and Utah? Of course I do. But if St. Louis wins on Saturday, let's just say they're 2 points away from the Stars. So, it's early. A lot of things can change, but at the same time, you would like to see some, good momentum. All right. Before we get some of the questions in and talk about some of your trade scenarios that you've so eloquently put on starsthoughts.com, wanted to talk about Lian Bichsel and what you thought tonight. And second part of that question, it seems as though based on DeBoer's comments, we'll see him in the lineup for, a few games at least.
Yeah, it's really interesting why Bichsel was called up now. We've kind of all tossed around this assumption that they'd want to get a look at him before, the trade deadline, before they make any big moves. They want to kind of know what they have with him, because we all know. I think Sean Shapiro was the first one to report that before game 3 or 4 against Edmonton, Bichsel was told, be ready. You might play tonight. And Duchesne even mentioned that at morning skate today. They were asking about Bichsel, and he said, "Oh, wasn't he up with us last year too?" And I said, "Yeah, he was, but he just didn't end up getting in the line." It tells you how crazy of a grind the playoffs are, right? Players try to remember really particular things, and it's just lost in this crazy fog of game after game and battle after battle. But it's telling that now is the time, right? They brought him up. Matt Dumba, further testing done today. We'll know more. Hopefully tomorrow we'll get an update at practice about what they've found, what they've seen, and what the timeline looks like for Dumba. But they could have called up a veteran, right? They earlier in the year they called it Petrovic. I think they took Kyle Capobianco to Finland as an insurance policy. Yep. But they brought up Bichsel, sorry, as we're calling him now. And
I think he's both.
Yeah, and I really believe that there's a chance that if he continues to look like one of the Stars' 6 best defensemen, and clearly I think DeBoer thinks he might be, given the fact that they didn't go to Brendan Smith and bring up Petrovic to be a healthy scratch. They brought up Bichsel, and he played, and he also scored a goal. So he took a penalty. It's kind of I think a pretty iffy cross-checking call early. Maybe that's just a rookie call, right? Where you get in a battle, the ref has no idea who you are. You're just going to have to eat the penalty on that one. But it seems to me that, he could. I think there's a very good chance, based on Pete DeBoer's reputation and what we've seen in the past, that if he's done Wyatt Johnston in his call-up in year one, right? People were saying, well, Johnston's going to start. Is he going to go back after 9 games or whatever, and save a year in his ELC or whatever? No, Wyatt Johnston was one of the best forwards for the Stars, so they kept him up. And if Bichsel, I thought overall tonight, he did not look like a player getting, he said he was nervous after the game. He said, oh yeah, I was really nervous. But to me, if I'm judging in a weird game like this, I would say, that looks like a player who deserves to be in the NHL. So if he continues to look like that in let's say at least the rest of this homestand or the next couple games of this homestand, I'm sure the Stars will give him a couple more games. Even if Dumba is able to come back before too long, I think they'll keep giving him a shot. And, if Bichsel does show you, even right now or in the near future, this is a player that you're going to want in your lineup by the time the playoffs start, that really changes the equation in terms of what the Stars are looking for at the trade deadline. Because then all of a sudden you have 4 lefties in Lindell, Harley, Heiskanen, and Bichsel, and Dumba, Lundqvist, Smith, and Lyubushkin. And probably Lyubushkin is the only player that you'd really be certain he's probably guaranteed a spot on game 1 of the playoffs. That 6th spot probably has to be a right-handed defenseman, since you have 4 lefties already. And is it one of Dumba or Lundqvist right now? I don't know that I would guarantee that right now, based on Lundqvist's history with DeBoer, and based on Dumba, frankly, already getting some healthy scratches this year. And I think Brendan Smith is a great veteran 7th defenseman, but I don't think he's an ideal player to start the playoffs in your 6th defenseman either. And clearly, I think DeBoer's thought the same based on the play. So it'll be interesting to see what they do if Bichsel stays up. And so far, I think there's every chance he could, at least until Dumba, if and when Dumba is able to come back.
Spits and Suds listener Michael Moore asked earlier today, but on the defensive side, Thomas Harley could have saved 2 goals with, clearing the net twice behind Ottinger. But he had asked, Robert, is it time for Thomas Harley to run the majority of the power play? And I think it's interesting based on the woes, and it's nothing against Heiskanen, but, maybe that's something that could be tried.
It's funny. I actually wrote about that. That's a good unintentional plug. I wrote about that a little bit this morning. About the Thomas Harley, who's actually having kind of a sneaky good start to the season. I mean, he's tied with Heiskanen in points. I think they both have something like 4 goals and 10 assists. And that's with Heiskanen getting over twice as much power play time as Harley, playing more minutes than Harley, right? So just purely based on opportunity to get points, Harley has had just as many in less opportunity. Although Harley has been solidly one of the top 3 defensemen. Kind of the way the ice time gets dealt out on this team, there's Lindell, Harley, and Heiskanen, and then there's your other 3 defensemen, where even a player like Lyubushkin that's been very solid and pretty consistent, he doesn't end up getting all that ice time, especially if you're trying to come back. He's not really as offensive a player, and he's not going to play a ton on the power play or anything like that either. So you have those top 3 players, and then you have the other 3. But Harley in the power play time, it's really interesting because when you dig into the numbers in the power play, in terms of chances or even metrics like expected goals or shots or however you want to look at it, the power play with Harley has been better than it has been with Heiskanen. And that's even though Harley himself has no power play points, Heiskanen only has 3 assists on the power play also. So Heiskanen isn't exactly racking up points in the power play either. And we all know the power play has been an issue. But given that the power play hasn't really gotten to a point where it's clicking and where it's really a solid weapon for the Stars, I think now wouldn't be a bad time to at least try things, right? And especially after a game like this, when so much of the lineup is flat. I understand you don't want to change so much that then everyone gets scrambled around. You look desperate. The NHL coaches are always going to try to kind of measure making changes without appearing desperate and scrambly. Players don't like not knowing who they're playing with either. But I think it wouldn't be a bad idea to have Harley playing with someone like Jason Robertson as opposed to Heiskanen, who's been playing with Robertson and Hintz and Johnson for a lot of the year. Why not? Harley's been better. Just looking at the underlying numbers, since you don't have any raw numbers to look at for either of them, the Stars power play as a whole, players on the ice, even though Harley hasn't scored, the players with Harley have scored more power play points per minute on the power play than the players on the ice with Heiskanen have scored. So all of the numbers, both the raw scoring numbers of which power play unit has been more productive and the underlying numbers in terms of where the shots are coming from, they've all been better with Harley. The only thing you can really say is most of that time with Harley also had Sagan. So maybe without Sagan, that second unit is less dangerous, and it probably is. But I think Harley's earned it. Just to be really frank, I think he's earned it. He's been a really good defenseman at even strength too. The same thing, underlying numbers and scoring and things like that have also been the best on the team in a lot of ways. So when a player like that is playing as well as Harley has been, not perfect early in the year, it's weird. I think to the naked eye, I kind of thought Harley was not playing that as well as he can at the start of the year. It just didn't jump out at me. And that's why it kind of surprised me yesterday when I was really looking at the numbers. It surprised me that, I think it's kind of sneaked up on me that Harley's actually really rounded into form this season, while Heiskanen, it's hard to judge with the minutes Heiskanen plays and the competition he always faces, and they ask him to do everything. But I think Harley deserves a shot, whether that's the top power play or more minutes or something. And maybe playing with Heiskanen on the top pairing, if that becomes a consistent thing, maybe they help each other and that has a knock-on effect. But Harley's had a really good season. Check out the piece on the website for all the boring numbers. But I think it's worth a try at this point on the power play, because you got to try something at this point.
Yeah. No, it's a really good piece. And I remind people that starsthoughts.com is free, and it's got terrific daily articles with a lot of entertainment that Robert throws in, and we'll continue to cite articles as we move along in this podcast. JW Streifel says the team has played one good period since Sagan went out. Does Robo need to go on LTIR too? Well, stop there. You can't go on LTIR unless you're injured.
I think the Players Association would have something to say if they tried that.
Yeah. So JW can't. The only thing you could do is scratch him.
Mm-hmm.
He says he has to be dealing with something because he is really bad. I mean, he had a tough surgery in the off season, but that said, or you could drop him down. He says every line is broken right now. Nil really needs to cook. I think they need 2 forwards. So to get 2 forwards that would make an impact. And I think it's a good lead into, your article on starsthoughts.com. You have to give to get. And you pointed out, I'm quoting from starsthoughts.com, with Sagan out presumably for the regular season at least, the Stars only have 4 right shot forwards in their lineup: Logan Stankoven, Wyatt Johnston, Colin Blackwell, and Maverick Bourque. So you bring up some interesting names, Brock Nelson being one of them. Just has a really, really solid shot, veteran, interesting, just basically played for the Islanders his whole career. Well, he has played for the Islanders his whole career. And you also brought up Matthew Olivier, who would provide some physicality for coming over from the Columbus Blue Jackets. A guy that doesn't mind dusting and dropping the mitts. So that could be a 3rd or 4th line player. So why don't you go over those players, and then, ultimate situation, who would you like to see, Robert?
Yeah, Jeff Merrick is the one who mentioned. I linked to it in the article, but Jeff Merrick mentioned Matthew Olivier as a possible piece he could see, on Columbus, right? So a team like Columbus, you're always gonna be looking at them as potentially, having pieces that they'll want to sell at the deadline. So Olivier kind of fits that description, especially if the team, as Merrick reports that, and he tends to be pretty plugged in to the Stars, just historically speaking. He's tended to be someone who's broken news about the Stars before, as a veteran and kind of a big time media guy like him. He tends to know people and hear things. So he's probably not wrong that the Stars would like to have some more physicality or grit or whatever you want to call it down lower in the lineup. Right now, if you look at a 4th line with like Maverick Bourque and Colin Blackwell, Oscar Beck's bigger. He's a pretty big guy. I think he's listed at something like 6'5". I don't know that he's quite that tall, but he's a big guy. And to Beck's credit, he even had to play tonight where he held onto the puck entering the offensive zone, and it looked for all the world like 2 Preds were going to take the puck away, and he was able to hold on to it, which kind of surprised me. I think he's sneaky strong, although maybe not so sneaky anymore, because he's, like I said, he's a big guy. But that's not a fearsome 4th line, right? That's not a tone setting line or whatever your coaches want to call it. So you can kind of see why a player like Olivier could make sense, right? Why adding some size back there or whatever could make sense. I think you can debate how helpful that is at the end of the day. But what you can't debate is that the 4th line hasn't. It's tough. Bourque was, tonight. I thought he had ups and downs. That line 8s and minuses tonight. Bourque, I think, was -2. And he won 4 out of 5 faceoffs. I mean, that's great. You like to see him winning faceoffs. That's where the handedness comes in too. The Stars like players to take, like every forward line, to be able to take every faceoff on their strong side. So that means you need a righty and a lefty on every forward line. So wherever the faceoff is on the ice, one of the forwards will be able to take it on their strong side. So that's where a player like Brock Nelson makes a lot of sense. He's a right-handed center, I believe. I believe he's right-handed, but he's a center. And with Sagan out, or with Wyatt Johnson now playing wing up there, you can see Steele can play wing, right? So if you put Brock Nelson, even playing with someone like Jamie Benn, and then, whoever you want to put up there, whether it's Steele or Bork or whoever, suddenly you've got 3 lines that should be able to be pretty productive. I mean, Nelson historically is 30-goal scorer, right? That type of player.
Yeah.
He's been a late bloomer, but he's been really consistent, and he's done so on an Islanders team without a ton of help around him for a lot of the time. So again, are those targets going to be available? It's early, it's only December, but I think those sorts of pieces, you need to think in terms of not just, I want to go get the best possible player available, but it also helps to kind of break down what are the kind of constrictions in the Stars lineup right now. And I think right-handedness, both in defense and maybe on the forward lines, is one. And then I think it's not unlikely that the Stars would like a bigger forward or two as well.
Yeah, Nelson is a big guy, doesn't necessarily throw his weight around, like not the most physical, but doesn't mind getting in front of the net. What I like about him is that he finds open space and knows where to go as far as the other players finding him. Also, the other thing I love, very accurate shot. Knows where to put the puck. Very, very good vision. And as you mentioned, all the goals, all those years. And the number that I think it was 61 that I tweeted out, that's his career power play goals. So a guy that can put it in the net in the power play, and that would be really nice. He's a left-handed shot, but I also have brought up on this podcast, Robert, about Mikael Granlund.
Yep.
No, I was meaning Granlund's a left-handed shot. I think you're right. Nelson is right-handed.
Yeah, it might be. Regardless, yeah, Granlund's a good target too. He's in San Jose, I think, so that's another team that would make sense, right?
Expiring contract,
selling an expiring contract.
The only thing I have with Granlund, he is, a little bit. I don't want to use the term gritty, not like an Antoine Roussel or anything like that, but he is undersized.
Yeah.
But he plays bigger. So, it's fascinating. I love the fact that we're in December and we're talking about what should be a March issue, but that's because of the LTIR money.
Yep.
So, all right, let's run through these so Robert can also go home. Otis Campbell, Dallas look like a team that hadn't played in several days. Well, they haven't. Where is the urgency and effort in these games? Feel sleepy until they're down. Why? I mean, I think that's a question Sean Shapiro's asked. I've asked. I think a lot of us wonder why they get out to these slow starts. David Kokis, I'm sure having 4 rookies is tough for Dallas, but not sure why they have slow starts and let visiting teams dictate games. Something is missing. And let's see.
It's funny. The only thing I'll say on those is that it's funny because the Stars also have had a few games this season where they've started out really well.
Yes.
I think they've had maybe even the two prior games against Chicago before the loss. They started out well, and then they barely hung on to win the game. So we've also seen it go the other way. So sometimes I think maybe the narrative of, they're a slow starting team, we go to that in games like this, but then when it's the other way, then we say, why did they quit? Why did they let their foot off the gas or whatever? And a lot of these things are just, this is the way the NHL works. Momentum is a big deal, and from one period to the next, maintaining that momentum is so key. And that's why when you're really feeling it, like the Predators were during those 3 minutes tonight, you got to find a way to capitalize during those stretches. And the teams that tend to win a lot of games are the teams that do, where you'll see this, where a middling team or a lower team will be able to come out and kind of hold on for a while, but over the course of a game, eventually they won't be able to hang, and the better team eventually will be capitalizing more. And the Stars so far this season, it's happened a few different ways, but they haven't really shown that they can do that night to night and really pile that up. They've shown they're not horribly flawed, which we all kind of knew. They're really deep, but it's something to keep an eye on. I think regardless of how the loss is, whether it's a slow start or a slow finish or blowing a lead, you do want to see consistency from a really good team. And at some point, you really should, actually. That's a reasonable expectation. So something to keep an eye on.
Well, Dart says part of me is hopeful that this team could add some good players with Sagan eventually on LTIR, but part of me is wondering if we should consider not giving too much up given how this team looks every other night. And that goes back to your article in starsthoughts.com where you cite Jeff Merrick, who has talked or learned that everywhere from top to bottom, Tom Gallardi, nil to coaching, everyone feels as though this is a win now situation. And that's interesting because if they go all in, you're going to have to mortgage something. I think they've done a magical job just giving up second round picks for Max Domi or Dennis Gurianov for Evgeny Dodonov or, Tanev for some picks and a player. I mean, they have not given up their prize prospects, but at some point you're going to have to really, really give. I feel if you go all in, you're going to have to give.
Yeah. And this is kind of it, right? Bichsel was the last of that kind of group of highly touted prospects, right? Bork, Stankoven, and Johnston, right? That trio was kind of these young forwards. They're all amazing. And, Johnston beat both of them to the NHL, and then it was Stankoven or Bork, and then Stankoven came up last year first. And now Bichsel's here. And we'll see how long, right? We know with Harley, the Stars aren't afraid to send a defenseman back down. So it's totally possible that Bichsel could be back in the AHL at some point this season, even if he's playing well. But there's no one else. There's no other really high impact player waiting in the AHL for the Stars to call up at this point. There's other players who, Antonio Stranges has been really hot. I think he just got AHL player of the week or the month or something like that. He's been really good. He's a quirky prospect. But I think David has written more about him than I have, but it's interesting. They've got, Matej Blumel, Cole Lind, Artu Huru. And then, they've got veterans like Petrovic and Capobianco there, but these aren't the players that other teams are looking, okay, we got to sell this valuable player we have so that we can get players like that. They're looking at Johnston, Stankoven, Bork, and Bichsel. Those are the players that they're asking for in trade. So if you're the Stars, the question is, well, how many draft picks can we sell instead of getting rid of one of those guys, right? And sometimes the answer is there's enough, like with Tanev, but that's not always the case. And even the Tanev deal only worked because Calgary really, really liked Grishnikov, probably more so than almost any other team, or at least more so than a lot of teams value. Right. And you can't bank on that happening with another GM. And I mean, if anyone could do it, it could be Jim Nill. I'll give him credit. He has a way of winning trades. But they're up here. So the question, right now, I think everyone would say Maverick Bork is the player who isn't scoring as much. So he's the one who hasn't proven as much compared to Stankoven, and he's not as valuable as a defenseman like Bichsel. And certainly Wyatt Johnston, the Stars should hold on to for dear life, I think. But what do you do if you're the Stars right now? Because at a certain point, if you need to add help, but teams are saying it has to be one of those big guys, you're going to have to make a tough choice at some point, unless Jim Nill can once again be more creative than any of us.
Right. And the question is like a lot of you probably are saying tonight, like, let's trade Jason Robertson. Well, that stock is down right now. I'm not saying it can't be certainly thrown in, but, one intriguing name that hasn't really been tossed about, but if I was a team, I might be looking at this past year's first round pick, Hemming, as a possible part of that deal. A guy with a strong shot, young. That might be a possibility.
I think Hemming's a good, you can build a package around a player like Hemming. The problem is Hemming's not close enough to the NHL to really help a team anytime in the near future. Right. So in a way, it's just kind of like putting a name to a draft pick when a player's down lower like that, right? He's far enough away. Johnston's a different category, even Stankoven, right? The way he was blowing the doors off juniors and setting records and things like that in Kamloops. Everyone kind of knew they're getting a player like this. And even last year, I think there's a pretty strong argument that Bork's value was probably higher at this time last year than it is at this time this year, even though he's been in the NHL this year, because he hasn't done what Stankoven did right after he came up last year and scored a bunch of goals. He hasn't done what Wyatt Johnston did, although almost no one does at 18 like Johnston did. So you're in this weird spot of, okay, maybe you say Bork's the one you're okay with losing just because he hasn't built as many great memories with Stars fans as the other players. But that's a bet, like you said, that could burn you because his value is lower. Same thing with Robertson in a different way. Their value is lower. So do you want 3 months of Brock Nelson for the rest of Maverick Bork's career? Is that a bet you're willing to make if that trade was there? And you'd probably have to add something on top of a player like Bork too, I'm guessing, depending on where the Islanders are in the standings. If they're hanging around the playoff bubble, then why would they sell Nelson? He's their captain, right? Maybe they'll want to re-sign him too. It's really hard in December to really try to nail down what pieces actually are available. And that's why Neil did such a great job last year getting Tanev a little bit ahead of the deadline, before really the frenzy started, and why he was able to get a good price. So the Four Nations tournament makes it tricky this year, though, because everything's paused for a couple of weeks, and a lot of those players are in that tournament, like Nelson, who's going to be playing for Team USA. It's going to be tough. The timing is not in their favor, although the trade deadline is very late on March 7th, I think.
If you swing a deal and you win it all, then you can use that. Yeah. Yes, Cole Reagans is playing well for the Kansas City Royals, but would they have won the World Series without Aroldis Chapman? Yes. Jerome McGinley went on to be in the Hall of Fame, but how many Stanley Cups did he have? And yes, Joe Nieuwendyk did, and was probably one of the top factors in winning the Stanley Cup. So you actually mentioned that in your article on starsthoughts.com.
Yeah.
I think that's a shining example of you really do have to give to get. So,
but and it's a gamble, right? That's a high stakes gamble type of trade. High stakes. Imagine if the Stars imagine if Nieuwendyk had gotten hurt again that year after the prior year when Brian Marchment broke his leg, right? Yeah. Imagine if Nieuwendyk had gotten hurt again, the Stars never won the Cup. Everyone would look at that trade as, oh man, that was so short-sighted. You just tried to sell out, and then we could have had Ginla. Think of how many cups we would have won if we had a Ginla instead of just a couple of years of Nieuwendyk or whatever. It's so hard. So as a GM, it really takes a lot of guts to make a trade like that, because there's so much possibility of it burning you for years and years and even decades when it's a potential franchise player. It's just tough. It's tough. That's why they get paid the big bucks. To Nil's credit, it's really to his credit that he's gone this long as Stars over a decade as the Stars GM without really making a trade of this caliber and still improving the Stars as much as he has. But it just feels like this year, one of that group surely has to be traded unless you're selling like multiple first-round picks. If you really want to get the type of piece everyone wants the Stars to get, one of a player like Robertson or Stankoven or Bork or Bichsel, one of those players would have to go if you really want to get a huge, high impact, championship winning type player.
Yeah, I'm fascinated what Anaheim's thoughts on Trevor Zegras are as well. It came out today that he's going to be out minimum of 6 weeks.
6 weeks,
yeah. It was not as bad as they initially thought, so to speak. And it's just fascinating because this was a guy that was putting up 60 points, and all of a sudden and he signed a multi-year deal. So I'm kind of fascinated by Zegras. I love the talent of the kid. It's just the last couple of years, last year was injury, but just, hasn't taken that next step after signing the contract. But I could see all of a sudden a massive revitalization in his career with another team. All right, let's get one or two more in before we let you go, Robert. You're so good to stick around. Let's see. All right. Rupert asked, and this is in the future, Mason Marchment and Jason Robertson are both UFAs in the summer of 2026. Robert, who would you rather re-sign?
Historically, Robertson is the better bet. Marchment has had a great start to the season, but he also had 2 years prior when his performance was a little bit more inconsistent, I guess. He's still been good at times. Marchment's a good player, and if he keeps looking like he's looked at the start of this year, there's no reason he can't be really valuable. But I think based on historical performance, Jason Robertson is still the Stars, one of the Stars' leading scorers over the last 3 years. And yes, the trend, he set a franchise high 109 points, right, 2 years ago. There's no way a player can keep setting records every year. So there's always going to be at least one season where he came down from that. And now this season, he started really rough, like you said, coming off the surgery. But man, the player that comes to mind when I think of, if you try to get rid of Robertson right now is Val Nichushkin. And there's other stuff going on with Nichushkin. They're not the same sort of player. The quote that always goes around is a quote from Nichushkin, for whom English is not his first language, where he said something about, I felt like I kind of gave up in that last year, gave up on the team or something like that. And, that's obviously with Nichushkin, there's a lot there, and there's a lot in Colorado that he hasn't really done well. And I'm not saying at all they're the same player, but the Stars paid to not have Nichushkin on their roster anymore. And then he went to Colorado and they won the Stanley Cup with him being a major part of it. So if you get rid of Robertson, that's a similar sort of bet, except it's a much higher stakes one because Robertson is younger. He's shown you a season Nichush can never even sniffed. Robertson has already shown you he can be a franchise player. He can be the highest scorer on the team. So if you're selling on him, you need to be sure. That's what I think is the Stars. You need to be sure. And that's got to be frustrating for them right now to not really be sure how much of this is just injury and maybe he'll come out of this funk, or is this more the player he actually is? You have to be sure about that before you make a move like this. Otherwise, it's such a big gamble. But then again, might be the time. They might have to make a big gamble this year no matter what they do. So maybe he's a player you look at. But boy, I don't know. It's a big move to make.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Uri Kralik says, I have a feeling Neil might go after Colton Parayko and subsequently reunite the Kyrou brothers in St. Louis. Well, that's where your LTIR kind of runs out, Robert. Parayko, who, by the way, is having just Colton Parayko's back, playing terrific this year, but his cap hits $6.5 million. He's year 3 of 8. Yeah. So that is a big long-term contract. Parayko's a good player, but that's a very, very rich contract to take on when you have the likes of Wyatt Johnston coming up and others.
It's a really interesting, the term is a big deal, obviously, because even if Seguin doesn't come back this regular season, the hope and assumption is that for this surgery, and Stars players have had this hip surgery before with the torn labrum and the impingement, and they've come back. Jamie Benn had, I think, both hips done almost 10 years ago. Klingberg, Hemschke, Seguin had his other hip done a few years back. So the assumption is Seguin will be back at least next year, if not for the playoffs or the end of this regular season. So that $9.85 million goes back on your cap starting next year. So in a player like Parayko also, that is, you talk about gambles. He's big, and for a while when he was younger, 6-7 years ago, that he was just such a great piece, and he was one of those players that the Stars coveted, right? A big right-handed defenseman who could score and play in your power play, do all these things, physical, has that big reach, just such a valuable player. But now he's locked up for a long term, and he was not looking good until recently. He was starting to look kind of like, whoa, that deal's gonna be around a long time, eh? Yeah. And so now you have to, that'd be a big bet for the Stars. But maybe the gamble for the Stars is St. Louis is wary enough about that term to where the price to get a player like that would actually be lower. But then if you're St. Louis, how do you replace a player like that? They don't want to be rebuilding forever. You don't bring Jim Montgomery in because you think you're going to be rebuilding for 5 years. So they're going to want to be competing again well before that contract term would run out. So the question is, do they really have the ability to replace a player like Parayko long-term? Right. I don't know that you can say absolutely yes to that right now. So trades are tricky.
Yeah, you're right. And Thomas Harley's going to be up, and that's at least 6 or 7 if you want to re-sign him. And I say at least. So you have to think of it this way. You have Heiskanen, who's over 8. You have Lindell, who's 5 to 6. You're going to have Harley. You can only pay these guys so many defensemen $5 to $8 million. You got to get the 2s and 3s in there, or even the Mills.
And I think, if you're the Stars, you would probably need to find a way to lock Wyatt Johnston up to a long-term contract. Yeah, very much. And it's going to be high dollar. It's going to be a lot of money. I think there's an argument that he could be the highest paid player in the Stars if they sign him long-term. He's been that good. He's this young. We'll see, right? He led the Stars in goals last year. He isn't quite on pace to do that this year. But then again, if he has another really solid playoff run and everything, the sky's kind of the limit for a player like that. Or you bridge him, and then you risk kind of what the Stars are risking with Harley, where that bill comes due, but a couple years later. And the Nil and Mark Janko, assistant GM, have been historically really good about aligning these contracts, but a player like Parayko is not in those plans. So you would have to make some other moves to make room for that. And then that becomes a real issue if Parayko suddenly isn't a top 4 defenseman for you, which is the minimum you would bet for that sort of contract for another 5 years. And then all of a sudden you've got a player making twice as much as Ryan Suter was for twice as long, and maybe playing the same role. And just because he's right-handed doesn't mean that age is any better.
You are one of the best at the beat for the Dallas Stars. I keep telling people need to follow you at Robert Tiffin. And he writes for D Magazine, starsthoughts.com. You hear him on a regular basis, and we are so thankful that he joins us. Go home, sir. Happy holidays to you. Get some rest. Thank you for all your contributions and your daily, I'm just telling people, your daily starsthoughts.com. It has to be a daily read. I do it, and Stars fans should as well, because some great trade scenarios. And like you said, the article on Thomas Harley, it's excellent. It's just a fountain of knowledge. So congratulations, sir, on all your work. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Gavin. That really means a lot, and I really appreciate that. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do, is just have a place where Stars fans can go and have stories about the questions that they're asking. I want to write the sort of stories I would want to read, right? I want to have someone answering the questions that I would be asking, right? Whether it's why a player is wearing braces, or whether it's the quote from Lian Bichsel about him going bucketless and helmet in warmups today, but he was so glad he did that because he just got a fresh haircut and he wanted to show it off. So, these things are important. Or, whether it's injury news or something big and serious. I think Stars fans deserve that. There's clearly an appetite for it, and there's more people. It's growing. I think your show, more than any other, has shown over the past few years that Stars fans want that. So it's just cool to be a small part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, go home, get some rest, sir. We appreciate all your contributions.
Thanks, Gavin.
And that's going to do it for another edition of Spits and Suds. Thank you once again for listening and supporting Spits and Suds. Don't forget, if you listen, for instance, on Apple, you can leave your comments and say, I like it when you have Robert on. That's great for us. Also, 5 stars is wonderful. We're like an Uber driver. Give us 5 stars. You don't need to tip us, but if you can give us 5 stars, that would be great. We are looking to grow this show and continue, just like Robert does with starsthoughts.com, to give you as much information to follow your team as possible. And we will talk to you soon with another episode. Have a great day, everyone.